Hi, how's it going? Ben here. Great to see you again. Thanks for tuning in. In this video, we're going to be talking about buying or renting a house in Thailand. So which one should you do? We'll look at some of the pros, some of the cons, some of the features, some of the bugs of buying property and renting property in Thailand. We'll try and compare them both a little bit, so maybe you can get a better idea of what is best for you if you are looking to move out to Thailand, or if you already live in Thailand and you're considering your next move. My name's Ben. I've been living in Thailand for around 4 or 5 years so far, and in that time I've been renting a house for 4 or 5 years, so I have a pretty good understanding of how renting a house out here works, how much it costs, and what are some of the downsides and all that kind of thing. I don't own any property in Thailand, but I do know people who do. I've been here a while and I've spoken to people about buying property and that kind of thing. So I have a little bit of a understanding about buying property, some of the rules, some of the restrictions, some of the legislation about buying property in Thailand. And I'm making this video because I think it is a pretty interesting topic. I don't think it's discussed too much on YouTube, or at least I haven't seen it discussed too much, so I thought I would give a crack at making a video myself. Now, if you are interested in buying property, if you know that you want to buy property, I did actually recently make a video on this channel about buying a property in Thailand. So if your mind is already made up and you have your heart set on buying property, then maybe check out my video on buying a property in Thailand. I'll leave a link in the top corner to that video. I may even leave a link in the description too, so check it out and have a look over there if you think you want to buy property. Now, finding a place to stay, renting a house or condo, buying a house or condo is a very challenging and daunting move, especially in a foreign country. So I wanted to give like a bit of an overview. We'll discuss some of the perks, some of the negative aspects of buying and renting, and some of the things that I've noticed whilst being in Thailand. So without further ado, let's get on with it. So this video is probably going to be called Buy or Rent Property in Thailand. To rent or not to rent, that is the question, and that is not a direct quote from William Shakespeare. Let's start by looking at renting. And for this part of the video, we're just quickly going to go through some bullet points on the topic of renting. So we'll go into these points in more detail later on in the video, so stick around for more details in this video. First up, it's convenient and easy to rent, so that's a big positive for many of you, especially if you don't have super long-term plans to stay in the country. Renting is probably definitely going to be the best option for you, unless you plan to be here for a good amount of time. So yeah, it's very convenient, very easy. It's not, it's pretty stress-free. It's relatively inexpensive. Now, renting a condo is pretty cheap in Thailand, so yeah, it's pretty inexpensive. So it's pretty convenient, pretty easy. It's not that expensive to rent a condo for like a month. It's pretty simple to do. And there's much less red tape and legal requirements, and that's compared to buying a house. There's much less red tape and legal requirements, as I'm sure you could imagine. And you have more options as well. We'll get into some of the reasons why, but you definitely have more options as a renter if you're a foreign national in Thailand. So that is potentially a big factor for some of you. So that's renting. How about buying? So first up, you get the benefits of ownership, so maybe we'll talk a little bit about those later. But yeah, it definitely feels good to actually own something as opposed to just renting something. It's pretty expensive, so this will be a bit of a negative, I guess. But yeah, the property market is pretty expensive here. Maybe it's inexpensive in comparison to your home country, but it may be a little bit more risky. So yeah, it's definitely more expensive than renting, unless you're renting for a very, very long time. So yeah, that's something to bear in mind, which you probably already knew, but I thought I'd include it anyway. There's plenty and plenty of red tape and legislation around buying a house, especially if you're in a foreign country. Specifically, we're talking about Thailand, so there's a lot of red tape, a lot of legislation that's unique to Thailand that restricts foreigners in buying certain property. So yeah, I'll go over some of that later in this video. But yeah, there are restrictions on foreign ownership of property. I kind of mentioned that in the previous point, but yeah, we'll talk more about that later. And there are less options, and that's because of the red tape, because of the legislation, because of the restrictions on foreign ownership of property. There turns out to be much less option. There's a much smaller variety of types of property you can own as a foreigner. There's a lot of like restrictions that we'll get into later, but yeah, you do have less options, I feel, when you're going to buy a house as opposed to rent a house or condo in Thailand. All right, so those were the main things I thought of when I was comparing buying and renting. So what we'll do now is take each point individually, and I'll go into a little bit more detail with each. Okay, so let's do that, and let's start with renting. So the first point on renting is that renting a property in Thailand is convenient and easy. Now, it's convenient and easy. It's much more convenient and much easier than buying property in Thailand. It can still be quite the challenge finding the right property. It can still be quite the challenge exploring a city, choosing the best location, finding out which is the best location in the town or city where you're staying, especially if you're not familiar with that location. So it's not all smooth sailing. However, in comparison to buying a property, it is much, much easier and much more convenient. Typically out here, there are plenty of rental options, especially in the major cities. So if you're in Bangkok, Chiang Mai, Phuket, or in any of the popular areas where there tends to be large expat communities, lots of long-term foreign tourists, then you're going to have an abundance of condos to rent. You're going to have an abundance of bungalows. You're going to have probably plenty of houses to rent too, so if that's something you need or require. At the higher end of the market, there's an abundance of luxury, like sort of holiday homes that you can rent as well, with pools and all that kind of stuff, especially in the seaside towns or the beach towns around Thailand. So yeah, there's an absolute abundance of rental property in the majority of the major cities. There's also no restrictions, so like we said, there's some restrictions when buying property. You can't own land in Thailand. That means you can't really own a house if you're a foreigner living in Thailand. So there's no restrictions on renting it. You can rent a house, you can rent the land, you can rent pretty much anything you want to rent, as long as someone's willing to rent it to you. So yeah, there's much less restrictions on the type of property you can rent. So that means in terms of finding property, you probably won't have too much trouble finding at least a decent place to rent in the Kingdom of Thailand. It should be pretty easy to find. It's also pretty easy and convenient to get started. Out here, things move pretty quickly, especially in terms of like renting a property or something like that. You'll probably be able to find the property and agree to rent it and be able to move in like a couple of days. There's no like waiting period or anything like that. So it is very convenient, very easy. Once you found a property, it'll probably be as simple as like signing a couple of forms and moving straight in there. So yeah, it is very simple and very easy to rent property, definitely compared to buying. So yeah, that is the first point on renting property in Thailand. The next point was inexpensive. So it's not very expensive renting a property in Thailand. You can get really, really, really cheap deals, especially if you can live without aircon. You could get way below like $100 for like a single room condo with no aircon, limited furnishings. But yeah, even if you want air conditioning, you want like a furnished room with a TV and kitchen and all that kind of stuff, you probably could, if you are willing to sacrifice some space. You probably could be paying around $100 per month for a room. That is very much achievable. In fact, I've been doing pretty much that for the last few years. I had a furnished condo for around $135 for quite a while. Now I'm renting a bungalow, which is pretty much the same price actually, but it was unfurnished, so I had to buy a few things, so it was a little bit more expensive doing this. But yeah, renting is really cheap. You can rent property for around $100, like 4,500 Thai baht is a pretty standard benchmark for a small condo or small bungalow. You can even get some houses, some unfurnished houses for that price. So renting really is a lot cheaper than many other countries. If I compare that to renting in the UK, it's day and night. It's completely different, you know. So when I was renting a house in the UK, it was astronomical in comparison, and I didn't even have the house to myself. I was sharing it with a few people, so it is ridiculous comparing the rental of a property here to rental of a property of some other countries. You can definitely get a really good deal. You can definitely save a lot of money living in Thailand, if depending on what you do for work and all that kind of stuff, obviously. But yeah, you may find, especially if you're moving from a expensive country to live in, that Thailand is really inexpensive, especially when you're renting property. That's probably the biggest difference you'll find. In fact, you know, food can still be quite expensive here. it's still a little bit cheaper, typically, especially eating out. But housing and rent is so much cheaper, I found, and that is one of the most beneficial parts of renting a property. Also, there is less red tape and less legal requirements. Now, if this is in comparison to buying a property, and that is probably pretty obvious to you, you probably already know that, it's pretty intuitive. But yeah, there's a ton less red tape. You won't need to get any real estate agents involved if you're renting a property. You won't need to get any lawyers involved if you're renting a property. The forms will be pretty simple and pretty standard what you're signing. You probably won't have to agree to a long-term contract, although you may be able to negotiate a better rental price if you do agree to a year or 6-month contract. So that's something to bear in mind. But typically, yeah, you're pretty in and out whenever you want when you're renting in Thailand. Now, this is in comparison to buying. There's a lot of legislation, a lot of legality, a lot of red tape about buying a property, especially as a foreigner. We'll get into that a little bit more when we're talking about buying. When it comes to renting, however, there are very few restrictions and there's not too much red tape involved for a foreigner to start renting a room, renting a house, or renting a condo. So that is a massive benefit in comparison to buying. The difference really is massive between renting and buying in terms of red tape. It probably is in most places in the world. However, I think it's especially true in Thailand. So yeah, this could be a deal breaker for many people, to be honest. And lastly, but not leastly, you have more options. So when you start searching rental property online, you'll see a whole host and a variety of different condos, houses, villas, bungalows. The list goes on and on. And there are very few restrictions on what foreigners can rent. In fact, I don't really know of any restrictions per se on foreigners renting property in Thailand, meaning you can rent a house, you can rent a condo, you can rent a bungalow. This isn't true when buying. There's a lot of regulation, a lot of restrictions on foreign ownership of property, which we'll get into a little bit later. But yeah, that doesn't exist in the rental market. This could really force your decision making, as maybe you need the extra space, maybe you need a house, maybe you need a garden. There are a few routes foreigners can take to potentially lease or buy property for business, and a few other things you could do. But those routes may not be available to you, and you may need that space. So this could really force your hand. So maybe you need the options that come from renting. All right, so let's move on to buying a property and have a look at a few of those points in a little bit more detail. So there is obviously a massive benefit of owning something. So when you own something, it feels a lot better. You've made an investment, you can go on to sell that investment. There's a ton of perks of ownership when you own something. You can rent it out, you can do what you like with the property, you can change what you like, the possibilities are literally endless. And owning property is on many levels much better than renting. For a lot of people, there are circumstances where it's not, especially if you're not here for that longer time period, but owning things is typically much better. So there's a lot of perks, a lot of benefits to actually owning a property. And those are all probably pretty obvious, but that was one of the biggest things that jumped out at me when I was thinking about the difference between buying and renting. Once again, something that is probably pretty obvious, buying a house is much more expensive, at least in the initial stages of purchasing the house. If you're renting for a long time period, maybe you're renting for 30, 40 years, something like that, then obviously renting becomes way more expensive. You also can't get any of your money back from property you've rented. You can from property you're buying, but you do need a large amount of funds. It is very expensive to buy property compared to renting it, obviously. This can be further complicated by some of the strict legislation and requirements that are around foreigners buying property in Thailand. Now, it's my understanding that you must bring that money in from abroad. You must bring it from a foreign bank account to a Thai bank account. It must be transferred. There's all sort of fees, and you would need help doing that. You'll have to pay a lot of fees and get that may be pretty costly in itself. Just moving the money may be very difficult and costly to do. So yeah, there are a lot of requirements. Also, you would probably need help from a lawyer to get all the finer details and the contract and everything written up. So all that adds to the expense. It'd probably be a very expensive endeavor actually buying a property. All that is increased because you're in a foreign country. You may need extra help. There may be a few things you weren't expecting. So yeah, it is a very costly endeavor going out and buying a property anywhere in the world, and Thailand is no different. So it is most likely going to be more expensive for you if you're buying instead of renting, and that is obviously, again, that's very obvious, but I thought I would include it in this video anyway. Now, the next point is potentially more significant. There is a lot of red tape and legislation when buying a property anywhere, especially if you're buying it in a foreign country. Like I mentioned, there are very strict requirements on buying property in Thailand. For example, you cannot own land as a foreign national in Thailand. There are a couple of routes around that, like I mentioned. You can buy it through a Thai business, you can do a few other things, you can lease the land and that kind of stuff, but you can't outright own the property as an individual, as a foreign national living in Thailand. So that's a pretty big restriction off the bat. That does remove a large amount of the housing market out of your reach, pretty much. You can buy a condo, definitely. So that is an option. But even when you're buying a condominium, right now, as it stands, it's illegal for there to be a majority foreign-owned condominium block. So to put that another way, the condominium block itself must be, or apartment block or whatever, must be majority owned by Thai citizens. So let's say you have a condominium, an apartment block, or a high-rise with lots of individual rooms. You can sell those individual rooms to foreigners. However, there must be a 51% ownership of each building. Must be Thai owned. Now, this may be changed. There has been talk of changing this due to COVID. They want to stimulate the housing market. They may increase the percentage of potential ownership by foreign citizens in apartment blocks and condos to try and stimulate the market. However, as it stands now, there can only be a 49% ownership of condominium blocks by foreign nationals. So this could throw a spanner in your works. Say you find a nice property, you find a condo you really like, but it already has it's already at the maximum foreign ownership capacity, then you can't buy that property. If you're interested in learning more about buying property in Thailand, I did make another video about this, and I'll leave a link in the description to that video, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video. So if you want to know more about the red tape and legislation of buying a property here in Thailand, then check that video out, because I did go into it in more detail. So as you were probably already imagining, there is a ton more legislation and a ton more red tape when buying a property in comparison to renting a property. So yeah, we did get into this point before in the previous point, but yeah, there are restrictions on foreign ownership. So yeah, like I said, you can't own land as a foreign citizen in Thailand. You can't own land, so you can't really own a house, because a house gives you ownership rights to the land it's built on. You can, however, buy a condo because the condominium itself, the unit you're buying, doesn't have any rights to the land beneath the condominium. Like I said, again, there are restrictions on foreign ownerships of condominiums. Maybe that will change soon, maybe it won't, but as it stands right now, there are a ton of restrictions on foreign ownership of land and property in Thailand. So yeah, this could be a big determining factor when you're considering buying or renting. And this could be the thing that puts you off buying altogether, to be honest, because it is a pretty major fact and it is a little bit lesser known about. And finally, there are less options because of all those restrictions, because of all that legislation. And there are a lot less options when it comes to buying, obviously. You can't really buy a house unless you're buying for a Thai company, or you're leasing the land. You can't really buy a house with land. You're not allowed to own a land, like I mentioned a few times now. Even when it comes to condominiums, apartment blocks, there are some restrictions. The condominium must be registered as a condominium, meaning that some unregistered or incorrectly registered buildings you wouldn't be able to buy from. Also, there is a limit to the amount of foreign ownership in terms of a percentage. There must be a majority Thai-owned apartment or condo units in the condominium block. So yeah, there's a ton of legislation, a ton of legality, and it does leave you with less options when trying to buy property in Thailand. So this could be something else that puts you off. Maybe you can't find what you need in the buying market. Maybe that pushes you into the renting market. All right. So in conclusion, Ultimately, it comes down to personal preference and circumstances. So if you're here for a short time, obviously you're not going to be looking at buying property. If you can't get a long-term visa, you're not going to be looking to buy long-term property. If you have a big family and require a large house with a garden and that kind of thing, then maybe that will push you into the renting market, as you wouldn't be able to buy that property if the family is all foreign nationals. Similarly, if you have a business, maybe you can go and buy a property. If you have a business or you work for a foreign business that operates in Thailand, then maybe you can buy property through that. So it does vary massively on your circumstances and what you need, really, obviously. Buying has a lot of benefits, but comes with higher risk and a lot of red tape. So we mentioned the legislation and the red tape that surrounds buying property, and that exists everywhere in the planet. But there are some things that are unique to like Asia and Thailand and that kind of things that you have to bear in mind. Also, it is riskier, I think, buying property in a foreign country. Maybe you have a good understanding of the housing and property market in your home country. Maybe you don't in a foreign country. I still don't really have a good idea of the housing market per se in Thailand. So I would see it as a bigger risk just because I have less understanding of the market, and that would make it less predictable for me. So it is higher risk, but potentially higher rewards buying property in a foreign country especially. And finally, renting can be less risky and much simpler, but may leave those staying long term wanting more. So yeah, you don't really want to be renting property your entire life. I think the majority of people, maybe you do if you're a traveler, you're a bit of a nomad, but if you're not, it's nice having somewhere that is yours. It's nice having somewhere to keep all your things. So yeah, it is, maybe renting isn't a great option for those who plan to live the rest of their days in Thailand. Maybe you are just like compelled to buy somewhere so that you definitely have a place to stay. So all that said, it definitely depends on your circumstances, your personality type, and all that kind of good stuff. I hope this presentation has helped you clarify a few things in your mind. I do have something else I want to show you, so I thought I would compare. So I found a property. In fact, it's two properties. One is a rental unit and one is a unit for sale in the same condominium. So I thought we could have a look at that just to compare, just so you can see the kind of prices you would be paying. Now, this property is pretty familiar to me because I actually did stay here for a while. I stayed here for around 6 or 7 months, I think. It's a very nice condo in Koh Samui. Koh Samui being one of the biggest islands in Thailand. I think it's the second biggest actually. And yeah, there's like great facilities, very modern, very nice place. So I recommend checking it out if you're looking for somewhere to stay in Samui. So yeah, this is a single 1-bedroom room at Condo Replay in Koh Samui, and the rent or the listed rental price is 6,500 baht per month. So that's if you're renting it. Now that price is only guaranteed if you take the minimum 1-year contract. So, because that is quite cheap for this building, to be honest. So yeah, you have to commit to a year to get that low price. And in case you're wondering, 6,500 baht right now is about 180, let's say 83 US dollars. So 183 US dollars per month for a property that has a gym, swimming pool, a massive swimming pool, tennis court is a stone's throw from the beach. You can actually see the sea in the distance in that photograph. You can walk to the beach easily on a very popular island. So you can see what I mean when I said the rental market is pretty inexpensive really compared to many other countries. I think that's an amazing deal for that type of property. It is a pretty small room if it's a similar size to the room I was staying in, but yeah, I thought I would show you some property that are listed and the market prices. Now, fortunately enough, there was also on the same website a 1-bedroom unit for sale. Now, maybe these are different types of units. Obviously, there's different. I couldn't tell which one was on like the higher floor, which one had an ocean view, all that kind of stuff. That could vary the price quite a lot in these types of places. However, I think it's fairly accurate. So like we said, it was 6,500 baht per month to rent if you were going to stay there for a year. This 1-bedroom room, so a very similar room in the exact same condominium block, is listed at 3 million Thai baht. Now 3 million Thai baht right now is about 84,000 US dollars. So probably a little bit cheaper than your home country. However, it is up there. In fact, I think you probably could find small condoms. Well, you probably couldn't find anything like this in the UK. Obviously, it's on a tropical island with an outdoor swimming pool. But you probably could find sort of single room apartments for around that price. Maybe they'd be a little bit more expensive. But yeah, you can see that that is a sort of standard price for buying or renting sort of these kind of condominium blocks, is which I wanted to sort of shine a light on, just so you had a little bit of a better idea of what the market looks like in terms of dollars and Thai baht. All right, well, that does conclude this video. I hope you found this video useful. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, consider liking this video. I greatly appreciate that. And consider subscribing if you live in Thailand, you plan to move to Thailand, because I live in Thailand and I make videos about living in Thailand a lot on this channel, so it'd be great to stay in touch with you that way. If you have anything specific you would like to know about renting or buying property in Thailand, let me know in the comment section. If I can, I will do my best to answer any questions you have. As always, I greatly appreciate you watching these videos, especially if you made it all the way to the end, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.